Hey there, I'm Alicia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite nonfiction books of 2021. Let's get right into the video. I do have 5 books for you today that I completely adored, and they were my favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2021. And so the first book on this list is actually going to be The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. This is one that you've heard me talk about endlessly since I've read it sometime in the mid-year, and that's because it's just such an important read. This is a book that actually took me a couple of weeks to read. Nonfiction in general takes me a couple of weeks to read, and that's just because nonfiction tends to be very thought-provoking for me, and I really like to sit with my feelings and thoughts and analyze what I just read. So it does take me quite a long time to read nonfiction, not gonna lie. But this one did take me a little bit more than I thought it would. And the reason for that, it's because it was very emotionally taxing on me. This is a book that sheds light onto the lives of undocumented Americans. When my mom came to this country, she was undocumented. So I did see her in a lot of parts of this book. And some of the stories that Carla talks about really resonated with me and with my family and some of the struggles that we went through. So it was one that was a little emotionally taxing for me. Nonetheless, it was such a fantastic read. This is also such an interesting concept of a book because she essentially acted as a journalist, going and interviewing different types of undocumented Americans to see what their daily lives were like. And that's something that we don't really get to see a lot in the news. Undocumented Americans are often polarized and used as political pawns, but we don't really get to see them as people. And that's what I love the most about this book, is that they're people just like you and me. And we get to see glimpses in this book on their daily lives and also their impact to American society. Another thing that I found really interesting is that since she did sort of act like a journalist, she mentions that she didn't quite translate this word by word, because if she would have done that, it would have lost some of its meaning and translation. And instead, she said that she tried to capture the essence of this family or this person that she was talking to. One other thing that I wanted to point out is that we also get to see how undocumented American lives are impacted by larger world events. Like, she talks about the Twin Towers and how undocumented Americans acted as first responders, and now years later they have a bunch of health complications because they couldn't afford health care. And it was just so illuminating. She also talks about Flint and how that specifically impacted the undocumented community. I just learned so much from this book. Again, it can be emotionally taxing, but it's still worth the read. The next book on this list was my favorite nonfiction book that I read in 2021 for a very long time, until I read 2 others that sort of made me question if this was my favorite nonfiction book, but it's still within the top 3. I just can't rank it for you because it's so good, and it's also quite short. And that is Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions by Valeria Luiselli. She's actually an author whose writing is just magnificent. It's spectacular, and I want to go ahead and read more of her books because I just love the way that she presents information, and I love her writing. And so Tell Me How It Ends is a book that sheds light into the refugee crisis that is going on in our southern border, and specifically it sheds light onto the journey and the tribulations and just everything that children refugees are going through when they come to the United States. This is also structured in a really creative way. She uses the 40 questions that are asked as part of the entry questionnaire for children who come to the United States without their parents, and she uses those specific questions as a catalyst for her own questions around immigration, on our own culpability as a country in creating this crisis and what we are doing about it versus what we're not. It was incredibly illuminating. This is definitely one of those books that helps build empathy, and I think it's one that all Americans should read because it is a crisis that is going on right now. And like I said, it's super short. It's under 100 pages. I read this in one day. Just to go ahead and give you a little taste, I'll go ahead and read a quote from this book. Why did you come to the United States? I've had to ask so many children. Before coming to the US, I knew what others knew, that the cruelty of its borders was only a thin crust. And once you're here, you're ready to give up everything or almost anything to stay and play a part in the great theater of belonging. It was honestly just so good. Please pick it up. It was fantastic. I wanted to introduce the next book on this list with a quote. White is seen as the default, the absence of race. Whiteness, then, is shrouded in silence, To speak about it openly is to break a taboo. In this next book, there was just so many impactful sentences that really resonated with me and really encapsulates how non-white people or POCs tend to feel in this country but don't really voice, or we just haven't found the words to voice. But it also gave me a lot to think about, and I learned so much from this book, and that is Conditional Citizens by Layla Lalami. This is a book that I haven't really quite talked about a lot on my channel because I read it sometime in the mid-year, and ever since then I've just been thinking about it and thinking about it. I think it's one that I want to get. I did listen to it in audiobook format, and I wish that I had a physical copy to reference because it was just so well written and so well researched. Like, it was incredible. By the way, this was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, I believe. And in this one, Layla Lalami recounts her journey as a Moroccan immigrant in the United States to getting her US citizenship, and she uses her own story and experiences as a catalyst and as a turning point to really explore the rights, the liberties, and protections that are traditionally associated with US citizenship and how they're not always applied to non-white people. She also talks about the ways in which white supremacy has adapted and survived through legislation and the arbitrary borders that are placed on POCs by white supremacist ideals. Honestly, it's just such a difficult book for me to talk about because it was so well written and so well researched, and I just don't think that I can do justice talking about it because it was just so well done. I think if there is a book on this list that you want to pick up, this is the one that I would recommend for you to pick up. She doesn't just talk about her own personal experience. So if you're someone that does like nonfiction where the author does talk about her own story, but is also placed within the context of history, legislation, and events, then I think this is one that you'll really love. The next book on this list is I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. This is going to be for my true crime lovers out there. This one was another book that was extremely well researched and also well written, but it talks about true events. Unfortunately, Michelle McNamara died before she can finish the book, and so I do believe her editor is the one who put the rest of the book together and tied it all up. So in this one, we're following Michelle McNamara as she tries to find out who the Golden State Killer is. And it's just one that read like fiction. I was just engrossed by this book when I picked it up. I couldn't put it down, but I was equally scared. I think Ben went to go visit his brother in New York, and that's when I was reading this book. And I was home alone. Granted, I do have 2 dogs, but they're like the sweetest dogs in the world. And I became so afraid of home invasions and that someone was gonna sneak in and kill me in my sleep. That's the level of anxiety that this book gave me because it's rooted in true events. It's about the Golden State Killer. So really, it just made me very vigilant and super cautious when I'm home alone, if anything. And I think, honestly, that's something that I needed to do anyway. But yes, extremely well researched, well written, and it was a nonfiction book that read like fiction. I was just super engrossed. Highly recommend if you're a true crime fan. The next and final book on this list is This Will Be My Undoing by Morgan Jenkins. I actually just ended up buying one of her new fiction books that came out. There was a 50% off hardback sale at Barnes & Noble's. I saw that she had a fiction book, and I was like, oh, yes, I have to get it. I think it's called Call Baby. I just saw her name and I was like, I have to get this book, even though it's fiction, because I freaking adored this memoir / essay collection. I can't just choose one favorite nonfiction book of 2021, but if I had to, it would be either Conditional Citizens or This Will Be My Undoing. So at the core of this is a memoir / collection of essays of what it means to be a Black woman in America. It really explores that intersectionality of being Black and a woman. There's just so many things that I learned about from this book. I also love that this is rooted in Black feminism. It's a book written by a Black woman for Black women, but I think it's one that everybody should read because it really does center Black women at the core of it. Some of the major things that it touches on, without going too much into detail because I want you to read this book, is how Black women are disenfranchised both by patriarchy and by white feminism. It talks about how they're just largely left out of white feminist movements. The author is also not afraid to talk about controversial topics, which is what I enjoyed the most because they were really thought-provoking things that I have never thought about because I'm not a Black woman and I don't have that experience. So it was nice to hear from her own perspective as a Black woman. And so she tackles taboo topics within the Black community like sexuality or the way that Black men can also infringe on the rights of Black women. She tackles mental health. She touches on the way that Black bodies are sexualized and treated as objects. Her essays just covered such a wide range of topics and they were rooted in honesty and vulnerability. There was one particular essay that really spoke to me because the author really opened up and talked about certain ways in which she was complicit with white supremacy in a way, and that really made me analyze my own relationship to whiteness and the ways in which I can be complicit and the ways in which I'm not speaking up for others. And it just really made me sit down and analyze some of my biases so that way moving forward I can go ahead and tackle them. So yes, they were very honest and real essays and I really enjoyed this collection. So those were my favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2021. This year in general, I try to read way outside of my comfort zone, which meant that I read less nonfiction books than I usually do. Nonfiction book used to be a top genre that I read, and this year it became my least read genre, and I'm ready to switch it up again and to read more nonfiction books in 2022, so please do leave your recommendations down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my channel, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!